Hey everybody, I am here today in Fort Washakie, Wyoming. It's in the western part of the state, about 150 miles from Yellowstone, and it's in the middle of the Wind River Indian Reservation, which is home to both Arapaho and Shoshone Indians. And where I'm standing today is the Sacajawea Cemetery. And behind me is the supposed grave of Sacajawea or Sacajawea, or there's a lot of different ways. There's been a lot of argument over how it's pronounced. What we do know is that she was a guide, primarily an interpreter for the Lewis and Clark expedition in the early 1800s that was commissioned by President Thomas Jefferson to explore the new Louisiana Purchase that had been acquired. They met Sacajawea when they met her husband, who was actually a French fur trader. And they were looking for somebody who could translate for them as they would be going through native territories. And she had been forced into this marriage. He had purchased her. But I'll tell you a little bit of the story of Sacajawea, and then we'll talk about the graves behind me and the significance of those. According to most accounts, Sacajawea, however you want to pronounce her name, died somewhere around a decade or so after the Lewis and Clark expedition. It was said that she got what was called a putrid fever, and that she passed away in her mid-20s from that fever. She left behind a couple of young children. One of them was named Baptiste. There was also a young girl, and those two children actually eventually became the wards of their guardian, William Clark, in Missouri. And according to his notes, when he went back in the 1820s and recorded a list of everybody who had been a part of the Lewis and Clark expedition, he wrote her name down and wrote dead next to her name. So his understanding was she was dead. Obviously, he thought she was dead because he had her two small children. So most historical accounts would agree that Sacajawea died sometime in the middle of the 1810s, I think 1812, something like that. There's a date for her there. In her mid-20s. There is an alternate account, and that's where this burial and this cemetery come in. There are some who argue that she did in fact survive. She eventually left her French husband and married, I believe, a Comanche warrior and came west. She was originally from the Dakotas, but she came west, ended up here in Wyoming, and died in the 1880s, had another child, maybe two, I don't remember for sure. And sometime in the early 1900s, a search was commissioned to try and find out what happened to her if she did in fact survive. And they ended up settling on this grave as the burial place. And there's a lot to the story, but they believed then that this was her grave. And you see it behind me, and it does say Sacajawea with a J on there. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that, and we'll take a look at these graves. In 1925, a man named Dr. Charles Eastman, who was a Dakota Sioux physician, was hired by the Bureau of Indian Affairs to locate the remains of Sacajawea. He visited a bunch of Native American tribes, and he started finding that there had been a Shoshone woman who lived at the Wind River Reservation, who was known by the Comanche name Chief Woman, or Porivo was the name. Some of the people that were interviewed said that she had actually spoken of a long journey where she had helped white men, and she actually had a silver Jefferson Peace Medal of the type that was carried by the Lewis and Clark expedition. Well, eventually Eastman found a woman who said that she was Porivo's granddaughter. She said that Porivo had a number of children when she married into a Comanche tribe, and one of those children was this woman's father. She also said that Porivo lived at Fort Bridger in Wyoming with her sons Basil and Baptiste, who each knew several languages, including English and French. Eventually, she returned to the Wind River Reservation, where she was recorded as Basil's mother. This woman, Porivo, died on April 9th, 1884. Eastman concluded from the evidence that Parivo was Sacajawea. In 1963, the monument that you've seen here in this video, Sacajawea, was erected here in the cemetery on the basis of that claim. And that's really all the evidence that Sacajawea is the woman who is buried in this grave of Parivo. So no matter what story you choose to believe about what happened to this incredible woman who had such an important role to play in our national history and has now ended up on the $1 coin that we remember her for, this is a beautiful cemetery, and whether you believe she's buried here or not, it's worth, if you're ever in this area, checking out. You couldn't ask for a better setting for a cemetery. The surrounding terrain is absolutely gorgeous. You really can't get a feel for it just by looking at a video like this, but it's just a beautiful, beautiful place, and it's worth walking around and just kind of seeing all the history that's here. This is American history. It's people who maybe or maybe did not identify themselves as Americans and certainly weren't treated very well in our history, and it's a sad chapter of our history, but this is American history here, and it's worth checking out if you ever get the chance. Thanks for watching.